Welcome back to ScholarScoop. I'm Steve Loflin. Today we're talking about adapting to changes in your career path and finding the right fit. Because where you start doesn't have to determine where you end up. Helene Scott started out as an aspiring therapist and took a hard pivot after she encountered some challenging work experiences early on. Instead of letting these setbacks define her, she turned them into opportunities, eventually becoming an organizational psychologist and a career coach. Today, she's here to share practical advice on how to choose the right career, tailor your job search, understand company cultures, and use self-awareness to crank up your full potential. Thank you for tuning in. And now let's get some Scholar Scoop from Helene. Hey, Helene, thank you so much for joining me today for a little bit of Scholar Scoop. How you doing?
I'm good, Steve. Thank you for asking me to participate in this. I'm excited to be part of your journey on this and to meet, or I guess I'm not meeting, but to be part of the journey with those who listen.
Oh, well, thanks a million. Speaking of meeting, I was thinking about this. I think we met back in 2016 when we started working together at NSCS.
Yes, we did.
Can you believe it? Like that's almost 9 years we've worked together.
Yeah, it's almost 10.
Almost 10, so I guess we can count it as a decade soon, which is great.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think for the Scholar Scoop aspect and what we're trying to do to help our audience, which could be high school, college students, maybe young alumni, or even parents, think about the journey. I can't think of a better person that would have a lot of insight into how to navigate a career and how to jump into it in the best possible way than you. So first of all, let's talk about you for a second and your journey. Like, I kind of put you in the bucket of maybe an HR professional or someone that knows a lot about HR, which translates over to the things we've worked on, which we have people, culture, all those types of things. What was your path? Did you set out thinking I'm going to be in the business of helping people with their careers and their career journey?
So sort of, kind of. I started off, I wanted to be a therapist. And so I went to school for psychology and I did a couple of internships in very hard environments, harsh environments, and hard for me emotionally. And one of the psychologists that I was working for said to me, I needed to find a different career. As first in my family to ever go to college, and it was the 80s, I didn't have like a role model to go to. I didn't have anyone to ask. So I said something to the chair, and he said, well, why don't you go talk to so-and-so who had just come in as an organizational psychologist, which was very, very new at the time. I talked to him. I was like, okay, I'll do that without any knowledge whatsoever. And I wound up going to Columbia University and got my master's in org psych. And I spent my career helping people develop their career. And then I stepped back and started doing consulting, which is how we met. And then I started doing coaching. And so I am helping people just a little differently than I had chosen to do when I was younger. But it's funny how I believe life takes you in the course to do what you do best. And you can't fight it. Sometimes you just have to go with it. This is not what I had planned to start off with, but I couldn't be happier with the choices I've made and how I've evolved and how I help others to evolve.
I feel like over the past year, maybe a little bit longer, the word that keeps coming up more and more in conversations I have is like serendipity and serendipitous of just a circumstance, a chance meeting, having a conversation with someone that you weren't expecting. And one of the things that you said in terms of your journey, first of all, is that there was someone that said directly to you that this is not the thing for you to do. And I think a lot of people sometimes get defensive when they're told you can't do something or this is not the right thing for you. What was it about that conversation that had you open to hearing that? Was it just because you knew in your heart you didn't want to do that or what?
No. No, I actually really did want to do that. And I didn't know enough to say, well, if I can't do it because of this, teach me how to overcome that obstacle. So instead, I was just like, okay, I can't do it, but I need to continue. I want to go to college. No one in my family had ever gone to college. I want to go to grad school. I want to create a better life for myself and my family. My parents were very, very working class, and we struggled, and I didn't want that. And I knew I wanted to help. So it was funny when I was doing HR for all those years in organizational development, people would say, does it ever bother you that you don't do what you went to school for? I'm like, what are you talking about? I do that every single day. Every day I do this. So it didn't work out how I planned, but it worked out how it was supposed to work out. So, and I got to do the things that I like doing, that I'm good at.
Yeah, and I
Or
think
you could determine that.
no, you really are good at it. And I think you've certainly found your niche and the thing that you should be doing with your life. I think for most people, though, the story is that you don't realize all of that in the moment. You have to be doing things and moving forward constantly to get to a point where you're like, hey, I'm in my sweet spot. I'm doing the thing that I love. But it's everything that you kind of worked your way through that maybe you didn't like or you thought you would like, and that you get to a place where you see these things. And it takes a lot of like patience and perseverance.
It does.
And you may see this, I see it all the time with the students that we work with. They have a sense of like, this is what I'm going to do with my life, and it's got to be this or nothing else. And trying to help them understand what you just said. Like sometimes the path isn't always as straight and direct as you might think. So how you embrace that and kind of live through those experiences, I think, are really important. And I know we talk a lot about mentorship and finding people who can actually help you think about these things. What's your general take when you're advising? I know you coach a lot of people that are more kind of C-suite and hyper elevated in their careers. But when you look back at the college student experience, like what's your general feeling about mentors and using those folks?
Yeah, it's funny. I just started working with some people who just graduated from college, helping them on their career search because they just don't know what to do or how to do it. And what I say is, first of all, figure out your why. Like, why did you do this and what do you want to do? If you're going on an interview, why do you want that role? What is it that makes you say, oh, I want this? Not that I just need a job. What is it about this job that inspires me? And then how can you bring all your gifts to that? So without sounding overly coachy, I know that sounded coachy, I'm sorry. But to look at it and say, like, here are the skills that they're looking for. Here's what they're hoping to do. Here's what the company's mission is. Here's how I fit that. And here is how that fits me. And instead of going in and just talking about, well, I could do this and I've done this and I've done that, personalize it. This is why it's important to me. This is what I care about. This is what I want to be able to do. And this is how I believe I bring something to your team that is a little bit different.
I think that's amazing advice. I think a lot of times when people, students or others are applying for jobs, a lot of times, I could be wrong about this, but I think we're in a place where people just throw their resume out at all kinds of stuff. And they don't even look at it as here's an opportunity that I'm a really good fit for. It's more like, I just need a job or I just need something. And so when they start having the opportunity potentially to have an interview, I think your advice is really good. You have to think about why you would fit into what they need. Because they're not looking at it like, I want to just hire you because you need a job. We're hiring for a role. We need you to come in and actually help us be more successful than we were before you stepped into the role. And I just don't think there's a lot of thought given to that ahead of time. So it's really good.
I would also like to say when you're submitting a resume, don't just put a resume in and email it in. Look at the resume. Is it matching the job? You're applying for a position. If your experience doesn't fit that position, how can you look at your experience differently to say this is the match? And then we go back and forth for decades about are cover letters necessary or not. It's your first impression. So to say, I'm excited for this role because I believe that blah, blah, blah is important to say. Not just I'm applying for the position or I'm interested. It's how do you start your why? That's your first impression. Your resume is your second impression. How do you show that there's that fit? And then if you're so lucky to get an interview, because you figure when you apply for a job, there's hundreds and hundreds of other people applying. How do you set yourself apart? What do you do differently? And then if you get that interview, how do you talk about it in a way, again, where you explain your why?
And I think students oftentimes are looking for, how do I stand out in this, sea of resumes and other things. And, coming right out of high school, if you're looking at internships, or right out of college, if you're looking for your first opportunity, there's oftentimes, it might be hard to say, what have I really done that's going to help me stand out? Where's the line in terms of how you would advise people to think about following up with the employer? Like, does it become ever too much if you're calling or you're emailing or you're just checking in and checking in and checking in? Is that like a valuable thing to do, or does it also become a little bit annoying in some cases?
It's a little bit much. So what I say is, get a time frame that you'll hear back from them. Mm-hmm. And if you don't hear back from them, give it a couple of days and then check in, and not like, where are we with this? Or I haven't heard from you. But to say, I really enjoyed the interview and I'm still incredibly interested and believe that I am the right fit for you because bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. I hope to hear from you soon.
Yeah. Sometimes the truth is, at least in my experience, is that email could show up at just the moment whenever there's a decision point starting to happen. And you never know if you're cutting it at the right time or not the right time. But I think sending it is actually something that's really important. I'm actually going to bring up something that I think is very interesting to me. You might tell me, let's not talk about this, Steve. But so we recently had a role at the National Society of Collegiate Scholars that was open, and it was a part-time role. That's a very important position for the organization. And we had a lot of people apply for the role, which is always a really good thing to have a lot of interest in something. And I know what you're really good at, and I hear from people all the time that they apply for things and they never hear anything back. They never hear if you're moving forward, if the position was filled or whatever. And I know you do a really good thing for us in the sense that you follow up with people and let people know where we are in the process, or in this story that I'm going to tell, that the position has been filled, right? And I think in those stories, what's interesting is how people respond back to being told that we appreciate you applying, but at this time the position's filled. From what I understand, you heard back positive things and then some things that were kind of negative, right?
Yeah.
What does that say to you when how people respond back? I'm just kind of interested and would think people could benefit from hearing this.
Yeah. So I got probably 10% of the responses. I got a responding email thanking me for letting them know and getting back to them. And most of the emails I sent, I tried to have something personalized in it so that it wasn't just a form, we're going in a different direction or whatever that people get. So people were like, thank you, Helene. Thank you for letting us know, blah, blah, blah. And then I got a couple that really shocked me where people were angry and acting like, how dare I? And you didn't even read my resume, or you don't know what you're doing. And it was shocking to me, the negativity. And what I'm going to say is to everyone who's applying for jobs, whether you're interviewing, sending resumes, you never know where that person is going to be next time. And they might be working another role for another company, and they see your resume and they say, oh, I remember how rude this person was. It also tells whomever's looking at it that you really lack professionalism and you lack the emotional intelligence and the self-awareness to know this is inappropriate. So your first impression, or I guess maybe it's your second impression, is a really bad one. And you need to say, like, is that what I want to be known as? Someone who just attacks verbally. It's so easy nowadays than it used to be to hide behind your computer and social media and everything else. And if this isn't appropriate, Steve, tell me. And I feel like people have gotten mean-spirited. Mm-hmm. And there's no place for that. And by the way, this position was a customer service type role where people were coming to you and your job is to help solve the problem. And if you are told that your resume didn't meet the minimum requirements or we're moving with someone else that we've hired, and your response is so negative, guess what? You've confirmed that we've made the right choice.
Right.
So you should think about that. You should think about how the other person perceives you when they get that.
I also think historically, like when we've interviewed for roles and we've made a decision about someone, and then shortly after another role might become available or something comes up that we weren't expecting. And then it's easy to go, oh, we just went through a process and we had a few good people. Let's go back to those folks and see if we could bring them into this conversation because we already know they're interested in us and we were certainly interested in them. When you're hiring for one role, you don't ever know the circumstances either of how that role actually gets filled in the end. And so when you were telling me about this a few weeks ago, it just reminded me, and I know we've talked about this before, but there's so little gratitude sometimes for things that actually are trying to help people in a lot of different ways. We see this over on the scholarship side of NSCS as well. We'll open our scholarship programs. A lot of students will apply for scholarships. There's probably a lot of, anxiety, and obviously people have financial needs, which is why they're applying for the scholarships. Right. And then when the final selections are made, similar to the role that you had open, we will oftentimes get mean responses back too when people aren't selected. And there's like a process for all of these things. And like you said, a lot of times it's indicative of, well, the process is working because this person wasn't really selected for it. But I'll tell you the other thing that I've noticed that I wish could be a little bit different on the scholarship side, and it's true for employment as well. We will give out a lot of scholarships to our members. It is very rare that we ever get a thank you from the student who received the scholarship. You know, we oftentimes make it into a big deal. We'll send a note to their campus. And I think when people are applying for jobs, if they don't get the job, I think it does go a long way to say, thank you for the time that you spent on reviewing my application and my resume. The same way it's like, thank you for selecting me for the scholarship program. And I think in the world we live in, you know, more and more people could get a lot further if they were actually taking a moment to reflect in a way that has a lot more gratitude attached. And so I feel bad for you or for Jen that works with scholarships whenever you put all this work into these things and then you get back the negativity, which is just a part of the process, but it is kind of frustrating.
It is. And for the scholarships, just so people know, we have people who volunteer their time to go through and really look at the applications and make decisions on them and be part of the process, knowing that they're making a difference in someone's life.
Right.
So they're doing this from the goodness of their heart.
Right.
And
I mean, I think it's not even just people that are reviewing it. It's actually NSCS alums, members, people who have been a part of the organization that want to continue giving back. And so they do put a lot of time into reading applications, no different than employers do. And I understand it. It's really frustrating if you're applying for things and it's going into a black hole. But to your earlier point, where I think we've arrived at some place where people behind a screen they turn into a version of themselves that sometimes I wonder if they're really proud of. And I know when we get very, ugly messages about things, and we reach out and call people and call them out on it, most of the time it's met with like, oh my gosh, I didn't think anyone would ever read that or ever know it. Right. But now we do. And the other part about employment that I often think of is, as an organization, and this is true for a lot of things that students might join when they're in college, national organizations, other honor societies or whatever. It's a very large network of people, and it's a big community of people who I think fundamentally would like to support each other, right? And
Yeah.
so when we're thinking about connecting people in our network, or we have employers that we work with that really do like hiring our members to work with them, these really kind of negative things that people do kind of create not something that we're very proud of referring to our partners, or,
Right.
hey, take a look at this person. They might be a really good candidate for you. Is it going to be the person that sent the thank you so much for reviewing, and, and we saw that they would be a good candidate, just maybe not the right time for them to have that role? Or the person that's sending us really negative stuff,
Yeah.
we're probably not going to want to pass them along to an
Right.
employer. So a lot of good stuff to think about. But I want to jump to something else really quick, because I oftentimes think of you as like the queen of culture. Like you always you're always fixated in a really good way on the importance of culture. And I'm just curious, like from your angle on things, when someone's thinking about a company that they want to work for, or an organization that they want to give their time to, how do you assess the culture from a brief interview, or when you only have a little bit of time to get to know a company? What are some pointers that people might appreciate on that front?
Yeah, that's hard. So it was easier in the olden days when you had live interviews, and then you could get there early and sit and watch. And right now you have to figure out the questions to ask. So you could ask what's your culture like? And you're going to get a standard answer. What's important is to think about what's important to you as you look for a place you're going to spend a lot of time with people you're going to spend hopefully years with. What makes that successful to you? What are you hoping to gain from that? What are your values? And then you ask some questions. So the person that I was working with recently was going on an interview. I said to her, why don't you ask them a year from now, when you ask me, what is it that I love most about my job? What is it that you want to hear? And she said they were all like, wow, that's a great question. She was going to start off with, so why do you like working here? And instead I said, turn it around to this. And she said it went so well. She's still waiting to hear that she got the job. I'm pretty sure she will. But looking at what's important to you and how do you ask the questions? And don't ask like the standard, like I said, why do you like working here? But make it based on what's important to you. And when you see people in this organization and they're staying for a long period of time, why do they stay? And it's okay to ask people what their average tenure is. What's the average tenure at this organization? Why do you think they stay? And figuring out like, how does this organization fit my needs? And how will I fit this organization? Because if you're not a cultural shift, that's when you see a lot of turnover. It's really hard because you're working someplace that you actually don't care about. And you don't care about their mission, and you don't care about how they treat people. That's not a good statement. So finding the right fit will make every moment of every day easier for you. Even sometimes we all have bad days at work, but it makes it easier because you know what you're doing is so critical. And you know that you're part of something bigger than you.
Which I think has been a big shift over, maybe it's generationally, but over the past 10 or so years, where a lot of people going into roles want to feel like they're joining a company or an organization that has a mission that's more than maybe just what the company delivers on as a product or whatever. And so I think that's really important. I think it's also about a feeling, right? I think, people that feel good about where they work, it usually comes from the relationship that they have with other people who they work with, and the transparency that they feel like they get from leadership. And sometimes, everything can't always be hunky-dory, particularly when you're running a company. And I would say from my personal experience, like sometimes I wish that there could be a little bit more of a understanding of the nuances that are made through decisions that get made. But I think the more you talk about those decisions with the team so they understand why it was made and how it was made, maybe they'll disagree with it, but at least you're doing your best to
Right.
share why. But that happens when people ask more questions too. And I think the more that the team gets involved and the team understands what everyone else is doing and they ask more questions, I think that just helps everyone sync up and be in a better place.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
And I'd like to say that starts with leadership. So if you're providing an opportunity for people to feel safe, to know that they're going to be valued, to know that they can ask questions, they will. And you're very transparent about things, and you make people feel like they can be too. So thank you, Steve.
Oh, you're welcome. I think it's important, but
important.
I also just think the culture is definitely important. I think culture is always evolving. I think as organizations particularly grow, if you're, and I know you've had some experience with this too, and maybe it's worth just a minute to talk about like the difference of walking into a startup, something that is just launching with all of that kind of, toddler energy. It's like so much
toddler energy. Yeah.
It's just like you're creating a thing. It's like a baby of sorts. Versus if you walk into a legacy 100-year-old company or a kind of financial institution or something else, there's a very different vibe. And I think sometimes people applying for those maybe need to reassess also kind of the environment where they can thrive. And what would you advise students, especially if they're thinking about going to work for a startup? Like, what's that like?
Yeah. So startups are fun and they're exciting because it's like you said, toddler energy, but you don't know what's going to happen. And there's a lot of uncertainty. And then if they continue to grow and you start hiring more and more people, the culture is going to shift because people make up your culture. Yeah. So it's when you're hiring, looking for those people who are going to keep the good parts of the culture as well, not just that they fit a specific skill set. That's important. So if we have a moment, I'll just share a little bit about me. I worked for a 100-year-old company when I got out of grad school, and I was a trainer for them. I won't say the company name. And I wanted to move. I lived in New Jersey. I worked in New Jersey call center. I wanted to be in their New York office and their training and development there. And they said there was a 5-year wait. And foolishly, I quit and started working for startups. Now, I say foolishly, but that changed everything for me. And the rest of my career has been with either startups or restarts or mission-driven companies. I worked with mostly for-profits until I started doing consulting. And they were all mission-driven. They all had a purpose and they drove that purpose. Maybe it was me being their head of organizational development and HR, who knows. But it always worked towards what the mission was and what we did. And had I stayed in that other place, it would have been the wrong fit for me because I wouldn't have gotten that kind of energy that I love and I wouldn't have been able to create like I love to do. So I say, figure out what works. But at first, try.
Right.
Try different organizations, see what fits. I don't think anyone says like, oh, I know I want to be in a startup my whole life. You don't know that. You know what you're looking for as far as making a difference, doing this, but really give some thought to it when you're going to an organization. If you like to be creative and you like to have a little bit more freedom, are you going to have that in an older, larger organization? And if that is where you want to be, how does that fit you? And how are you going to ensure that you're adding value there and they're adding value to you? So I say try different things, see how it works out. Nowadays, no one stays at a company for the rest of their lives. So it's okay. And just, it's not a failure if you're someplace and you say, this doesn't fit me.
Right.
But if you say that every time you have a job and you keep leaving that job, that's a different story. You need to look at that. But I think just really giving thought to what is it that you enjoy the most? And when you're on the interview, ask those real questions to see if it's fitting what you're looking for, rather than, what's the dress code? What are our hours? Things like that.
Well, I think one of the things with startups and the statistic, it's pretty frightening. I think like 90% of startups don't actually make it beyond 5 years, right? So You just have to be aware of that. And I think sometimes it's framed up like, are you risk averse or not? But you
Yeah.
could take a job at the 100-year-old company for the security of that. Like it's proven, it's been around a long
Right.
time,
What's
but it
important
also
to
comes
you?
with risk. You don't know
Yeah.
those risks until you get in there.
Right.
And the risk might also be the energy is just not what you want that you might get
Yeah.
from the startup experience. But I know we're sort of running out on our time
Can I can I say one more
together.
thing though?
Yeah, and
In
I have one more thing too to bring up
Okay.
before we
In
wrap.
either experience you go to, look at it as what can I gain and grow from here?
Mhm.
What are challenges? How do I overcome them? And how have I grown in this environment? And how have I served myself and what I'm hoping for the future? It's only a failure if you don't do that.
1000% agree. I had a student one time told me that they were afraid to work for a startup because if it didn't actually work out, it would reflect poorly on them when they went to get other jobs. And I'm like, that's a really narrow way to look at it because what you
Mm-hmm.
learn from that experience is oftentimes
Amazing. Yeah.
exactly what someone else wants to hire you for. You can bring a
Right.
whole lot to that. And
Right.
it is interesting how we get caught up in our heads about things that may or
Yeah.
may not have any reality attached to it at all. But that's really good advice, which I think it all, in sort of summarizing this, goes back to something else that I think you always bring to the table in conversations, that to make these kinds of decisions, you're always much better at it when you really know as much as possible about yourself.
Yeah.
And I know you really are an advocate for taking these various assessments that give you
Yes.
all kinds of intel about what makes you tick and what makes you function at your highest level. And are you risk averse or not risk averse? What are some of your thoughts on doing that on your own? Not so much as the company might ask you to do
Mm-hmm.
it, once you start, but what can people do ahead of going to work for a company? And how could that help them maybe even be better at answering questions in an interview?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different assessments, and you can do them as individuals, and they're not going to break the bank. There's some that are free. I would go out and Google where
Yeah,
you could do it. There are some, so I do DISC. And
right,
so there are DISC assessments that are free. They're not all perfect. You're not going
right.
to get a world class report, but you're going to get enough initial information that you can then start saying, oh, this sounds like it makes sense to me. And then you use that in your decision making. So if creativity is important to you, if relationships are important to you, and this role is going to have you isolated for whatever reason, think about that. I'm not saying don't do it, but think how you're going to do it in a way where you're adding value and you're learning and you're doing something important. So you have to just look through it and decide what do I need? What is my innate style? And how do I communicate with people? How do I work? How do I work best? And then
Mhm.
ask those questions on your interview. Like in this role, would I be doing XYZ or would I be doing this? How would I work with other people? All of that gives you really good insights into whether or not it's a role you want.
Yeah, and I know actually through NSCS, we have a couple of those assessments that we
Yeah.
make available to our members to try to help, just like you're saying, the more you can
Mhm.
talk about things in a way that you explain how well you know yourself and how
Right.
well you know yourself as being a good candidate for whatever this role is, it comes off as confidence in a way that I think
Hmm.
people really do appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, Helene, for
Thanks,
sharing
Steve.
some incredible scholar scoop. And I forgot to mention earlier that also, not really knowing this when we first met, but one of the things that you are should be especially proud of is that you actually raised a son who is a member of NSCS. So,
I was
um,
wondering when we were going to get to that. I'm an
yeah,
NSCS mom.
I
Yay.
know you're an NSCS mom, and I think that that says a lot about you. And so thank you for taking the time, and thank you for all
Thank
the
you.
great things that you do for the organization. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for trusting me. I enjoy working with you and the team.